What happens when an ordinary security guard becomes the last line of defense between royal protocol and human compassion? When Sarah Mitchell clocked in for her night shift at Buckingham Palace on that fateful October evening, she never imagined she would face a choice that could destroy her career, her reputation, and possibly her freedom.
Standing at the entrance to the restricted medical wing with Queen Camilla demanding immediate access to see her critically ill husband, Sarah had mere seconds to decide: follow the ironclad security protocols that had governed the palace for centuries, or risk everything for what she believed was right. This is the true story of one woman's impossible choice, the powerful forces that collided in the corridors of power, and the shocking consequences that rippled through the highest levels of the British monarchy. It's a tale that exposes the hidden tensions within the royal household, the price of unwavering loyalty, and the moment when duty and humanity came into direct conflict behind the most famous doors in England. What Sarah did next would change not only her own life forever, but also reveal cracks in the foundation of one of the world's most revered institutions. This is her story, raw, authentic, and ultimately transformative. Sarah Mitchell adjusted her radio for the third time that evening, the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders as she took her position at the medical wing entrance of Buckingham Palace. 23 years of service had taught her that quiet nights could turn chaotic without warning, but nothing in her experience had prepared her for what was about to unfold. The October air carried an unusual tension through the palace corridors. Word had spread quickly among the staff that King Charles was gravely ill, confined to the private medical suite behind the doors she now guarded. The official statement spoke of routine medical observation, but Sarah had seen enough royal emergencies to recognize the signs of something far more serious. She remembered her first day at the palace, fresh out of security training, intimidated by the grandeur and the weight of history surrounding her. Her supervisor, a stern man named Geoffrey Hartwell, had pulled her aside and delivered advice that had guided her career ever since. Trust was earned in drops and lost in buckets within these walls, he had said. The royal family depended on people who could follow orders without question, who understood that their personal feelings had no place in palace security. Now, at 51, Sarah had built her reputation on exactly those principles. She knew every protocol, every procedure, every exception to every rule. Her colleagues respected her judgment, and the royal staff trusted her discretion. She had guarded state dinners, protected visiting dignitaries, and maintained security during some of the most sensitive moments in recent royal history. But tonight felt different. The medical team had been unusually tight-lipped when they arrived 6 hours earlier, their faces grave as they wheeled specialized equipment through the corridors. Dr. Hamilton, the royal physician, had given her explicit instructions. Absolutely no one was to enter the medical suite without his personal authorization. Not staff, not family members, not even other members of the security team. Sarah understood the reasoning behind such restrictions. Medical emergencies required controlled environments, and the presence of additional people, however well-intentioned, could interfere with treatment. She had enforced similar lockdowns before, though never for such an extended period. The palace buzzed with nervous energy despite the late hour. Kitchen staff whispered in hushed tones as they prepared trays that would remain untouched. Housekeeping moved through their duties with uncharacteristic urgency, as if staying busy could ward off whatever uncertainty hung in the air. Even the corgis seemed subdued, their usual playful energy replaced by an almost human understanding that something was terribly wrong. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her daughter Emma, studying at university in Scotland. The news had broken an hour earlier, carefully worded statements about the king's health that revealed nothing while confirming everything. Emma wanted to know if her mother was safe, if the security situation at the palace remained stable. Sarah typed back a reassuring response, though she wondered how honest she was being. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed down the marble hallway, growing closer. Sarah straightened, her hand instinctively moving to her radio. Royal protocol demanded that she identify anyone approaching the restricted area, regardless of their rank or relationship to the family. She had done this thousands of times before, a routine challenge that typically resulted in polite acknowledgement and compliance. Queen Camilla appeared around the corner, her face flushed and her usual composure clearly strained. She wore a simple cardigan over her dress, suggesting she had dressed quickly. Her eyes were red-rimmed and her hands trembled slightly as she approached the medical wing entrance. Sarah felt her stomach tighten. She had interacted with Queen Camilla on numerous occasions over the years, always finding her to be gracious and understanding of security requirements. The Queen had never challenged protocols, never used her position to circumvent established procedures. She understood better than most that rules existed for important reasons. But tonight, everything about Queen Camilla's demeanor suggested desperation. She walked with purpose but also with the uncertain gait of someone operating on pure emotion rather than rational thought. Sarah recognized the look because she had seen it before, on the faces of family members during other medical emergencies, when love and fear overwhelmed everything else. "Your Majesty," Sarah said, stepping slightly forward to indicate her presence without blocking the hallway entirely. "I'm afraid the medical wing is currently restricted under Dr. Hamilton's direct orders. I can contact him immediately if you'd like to request access." Queen Camilla stopped, her eyes focusing on Sarah as if seeing her for the first time. "This is the book, it's about history." Queen Camilla stopped, her eyes focused on Sarah. Queen Camilla stopped, her eyes focused on Sarah. Separated by more than physical distance, Sarah saw raw pain in the Queen's expression, the kind of anguish that transcended royal training and revealed the fundamental humanity beneath the crown. "Sarah, isn't it?" Queen Camilla said, her voice steadier than her appearance suggested. "You've been here for many years. You understand how things work." Sarah nodded, uncertain where this conversation was heading, but aware that it was unlike any interaction she had ever had with a member of the royal family. There was an intimacy to the Queen's tone, as if she were speaking to a friend rather than a security guard. "I need to see my husband," Queen Camilla continued. "Dr. Hamilton means well, but he doesn't understand. Charles is asking for me. The nurses told me before they were instructed not to communicate with family members." "My husband is dying, Sarah. He's dying, and he's asking for me." The words hung in the air between them like a physical presence. Sarah felt the protocols she had followed for over 2 decades warring with something deeper, something more human. She had sworn an oath to protect the royal family. But what did protection mean in a moment like this? Did it mean following orders that might deny a dying man the comfort of his wife's presence? Or did it mean recognizing that sometimes the most important security was emotional rather than physical? She thought of her own husband, Michael, who had died 5 years earlier after a brief battle with cancer. She remembered the final days, when nothing mattered except being together, when medical procedures and visiting hours seemed like cruel abstractions designed by people who had never faced loss. A hospital staff had bent rules to allow her to stay by his bedside, understanding that love deserved accommodation even within institutional settings. That this was different, this was the King of England, and she was bound by oaths and procedures that governed one of the world's most closely watched institutions. Her personal experiences, however relevant they might feel, could not override her professional obligations. Or could they? Queen Camilla took a step closer, and Sarah noticed tears beginning to form in the older woman's eyes. "I'm not asking you to abandon your post or violate your oath," the Queen said quietly.
"I'm asking you to remember that underneath all of this protocol and procedure, we're just 2 people who love our husbands."
"Charles needs me, Sarah."
"And I need to be with him." Sarah felt her resolve wavering. Every instinct told her to step aside, to trust that Queen Camilla's judgment about her husband's needs outweighed Dr. Hamilton's security concerns. But another voice reminded her of Geoffrey's warning from all those years ago, about the importance of following orders even when they seemed arbitrary or cruel. She looked down the hallway toward the medical suite, where soft lights glowed behind closed doors. Somewhere beyond those doors, the King of England lay dying, and his wife stood pleading for the chance to hold his hand. The situation felt surreal, like something from a movie rather than her actual life. Her radio crackled with a routine security check, another guard confirming that all was quiet in the East Wing. Sarah responded automatically, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. The normal sounds of palace operation continued around them as if the world hadn't shifted on its axis in the span of a single conversation. Queen Camilla waited, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. There was no anger in her expression, no imperial demand or royal command, just a wife asking another woman to understand what love required in the face of institutional inflexibility. Sarah realized that whatever she decided in the next few moments would define not only the rest of her career, but also her understanding of what duty truly meant. She had spent 23 years believing that following orders was the highest form of service, that loyalty meant never questioning the wisdom of those in authority. But now she wondered if true loyalty might sometimes require the courage to act on deeper principles, even when such action carried enormous personal risk. The sound of her own heartbeat seemed unnaturally loud in the silence that followed. Two women, separated by class and circumstance but united by the universal experience of loving someone facing death, stood in a palace hallway at the moment when duty and humanity collided. Sarah Mitchell, palace security guard, looked into the eyes of Queen Camilla and realized that the most important decision of her life had nothing to do with protocols or procedures. It had everything to do with what kind of person she wanted to be when the most vulnerable asked for her compassion. The radio crackled again. Another routine check from the central security desk. Sarah's finger hovered over the response button, knowing that whatever words she spoke next would determine whether she became someone who followed orders or someone who followed her conscience. In the medical suite beyond, a king lay dying, unaware that his fate and his wife's depended on the choice of a woman whose name he might never even know. Sarah's mind raced through the potential consequences of each choice before her. If she allowed Queen Camilla to pass, she would be directly violating Dr. History, Hamilton's explicit orders. The doctor had made it clear that no exceptions would be tolerated, regardless of who requested access. Sarah had seen colleagues terminated for far lesser breaches of protocol, but as she looked at Queen Camilla's tear-streaked face, another set of consequences became equally clear. If she maintained her position and prevented a dying man from seeing his wife in his final moments, she would be responsible for a different kind of violation, one that couldn't be measured in policy manuals or disciplinary procedures. The Queen seemed to sense Sarah's internal struggle. Instead of pressing her advantage or invoking her royal authority, she simply waited, allowing the security guard the space to wrestle with an impossible choice. This patience, Sarah realized, revealed more about Queen Camilla's character than years of public appearances ever could.
"May I tell you something about my husband?" Queen Camilla asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper.
"Something that might help you understand why this matters so much?" Sarah nodded, though she wondered if hearing more would make her decision easier or more difficult. The Queen glanced around the empty hallway as if checking for eavesdroppers, then continued. "Charles has always been terrified of dying alone. When we first married, he told me about nightmares he'd had since childhood, dreams of being isolated in his final moments while duty and protocol kept the people he loved at arm's length. He made me promise that whatever happened, I would find a way to be with him when the time came."
The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She thought again of Michael's final days, how important it had been to hold his hand as he slipped away. The idea of denying someone that basic human comfort seemed almost cruel, regardless of the institutional reasons behind such denial. Her radio buzzed again, this time with an urgent message from the Security Command Center. "Mitchell, we're showing movement in your sector. Status report. Over." Sarah keyed her radio, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "Central, this is Mitchell, conducting routine interaction with authorized personnel. All secure. Over." The response came back immediately. "Copy that, Mitchell. Be advised that Dr. Hamilton has requested additional security at the medical wing entrance. He's concerned about potential unauthorized access attempts. Maintain heightened vigilance." Over. Sarah felt her throat tighten. Dr. Hamilton's message wasn't subtle. He suspected that family members might try to breach security, and he was making it clear that any guard who allowed such access would face severe consequences. The timing couldn't have been more pointed. Queen Camilla had heard the radio exchange, and her shoulders sagged slightly. "I see," she said quietly. "He's making sure you understand the cost of helping me." Sarah looked at the Queen with new understanding. This wasn't just about a wife wanting to see her dying husband. It was about a power struggle within the palace hierarchy, with Sarah caught in the middle. Dr. Hamilton represented medical authority and established protocol, while Queen Camilla represented something more fundamental but less codified, the claims of love and marriage that existed before and beyond institutional structures. "Your Majesty," Sarah said carefully, "I need you to understand my position. I have a daughter in university, a mortgage, a life that depends on this job. If I violate direct orders, I don't just lose my career. I lose everything I built over more than 2 decades. Queen Camilla's expression softened with understanding rather than disappointment. "Of course," she said. "I should have realized. I'm asking you to sacrifice your security for mine, and that's not fair. You have your own family to protect." But as the Queen turned to walk away, Sarah felt something inside her rebel against the easy resolution. Was this really what duty meant? Following orders that served institutional convenience rather than human need? She had joined palace security because she believed in service, in protecting something greater than herself. But what was she protecting if not the people who made the institution meaningful? She thought of Jeffrey Hartwell's advice from all those years ago, about earning trust and maintaining loyalty. But whose trust mattered most? Dr. Hamilton's with his focus on medical protocols, the security command centers with their emphasis on following orders without question, or the trust of a dying king who had asked for his wife's presence in his final moments. "Wait," Sarah called out, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Queen Camilla stopped and turned back, hope flickering in her eyes. Sarah took a deep breath, feeling as if she were stepping off a cliff. "How do I know he's really asking for you? How do I know this isn't just what you want to believe?" Instead of taking offense at the question, Queen Camilla reached into her cardigan pocket and pulled out her phone. She scrolled through her messages and held the screen toward Sarah. "Nurse Patricia sent me this 20 minutes ago, before Dr. Hamilton issued his communication ban. A good passage. Your Majesty. His Majesty is awake and asking for you specifically. He says he has something important to tell you. Dr. Hamilton says no visitors, but the king is becoming agitated. He keeps saying your name." The evidence was undeniable and it changed everything. This wasn't about Queen Camilla's emotional needs or her desire to be present during a crisis.
Oh.
This was about a patient's explicit request communicated by medical staff before politics intervened. Sarah looked at her phone and saw several missed calls from Emma, her daughter. The news was spreading, and the outside world was beginning to understand the gravity of the situation. Soon, reporters would be camped outside palace gates, and every decision made within these walls would be scrutinized and analyzed.
But that future scrutiny felt abstract compared to the immediate reality of Queen Camilla's pain and King Charles's reported request.
Sarah had spent her career protecting the royal family from external threats, but now she wondered if the greatest threat might come from within, from rigid adherence to rules that no longer served their original purpose.
"If I help you," Sarah said slowly, "it can't look like I'm abandoning my post or ignoring security protocols. There has to be a way to do this that protects both of us." Queen Camilla's face brightened with the first genuine hope Sarah had seen all evening. "What do you have in mind?" Sarah thought quickly, her mind cycling through various possibilities and their potential consequences.
Medical emergency protocols allow for immediate family access in life-threatening situations, but only with proper escort and identification verification. If you're willing to follow standard emergency procedures, I can justify your presence as compliance with existing policies rather than violation of Dr.
Hamilton's orders. It was a technicality, but technicalities had governed palace operations for centuries. If challenged later, Sarah could argue that she was following established emergency protocols rather than making unauthorized exceptions. The distinction might not protect her from all consequences, but it would provide some cover for her decision. Queen Camilla nodded eagerly. "Yes, of course. Whatever procedures you need to follow." Down. Sarah keyed her radio, her heart pounding as she prepared to commit to a course of action that would define the rest of her career. "Central. This is Mitchell. I have Queen Camilla requesting emergency family access to the medical wing under Code 7 protocols. Beginning escort and identification verification procedures. Over." The response took longer than usual, and Sarah could almost hear the consultation happening at the command center. Finally, her radio crackled back to life. "Mitchell, be advised that Dr. Hamilton has requested no family access at this time. Please inform Her Majesty that updates will be provided through proper channels. Over." Sarah felt Queen Camilla's hope deflate beside her, but she wasn't finished. "Central, Code 7 protocols take precedence over individual physician preferences when the patient has made explicit requests for family presence. I have documentation of the patient's wishes from medical staff. Please confirm policy hierarchy for emergency situations. Over." Another long pause followed. Sarah knew she was pushing the boundaries of her authority, but she also knew that emergency protocols existed for exactly these situations. The palace operated under multiple layers of policy, and sometimes those layers conflicted with each other. "Mitchell, stand by for supervisor consultation," came the reply. During the wait, Queen Camilla looked at Sarah with an expression that mixed gratitude with concern. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "I don't want you to sacrifice your position for my sake." Sarah surprised herself with her answer. "Your Majesty, I've spent 23 years following orders without question. Tonight, I'm following my oath to protect the royal family, which includes protecting your right to be with your husband when he needs you most." The radio finally crackled back to life with a new voice. Sarah's immediate supervisor, David Chen. "Mitchell, this is Chen. What's your assessment of the medical emergency status?" Sarah took a deep breath. "Supervisor, I have reliable information that the patient is conscious and specifically requesting family presence. Medical staff confirmed this request before communication restrictions were implemented. Given the life-threatening nature of the situation, I believe Code 7 protocols apply. Another pause.
Then, Mitchell, escort Her Majesty to the medical wing entrance and wait for further instructions. Document everything according to emergency procedures.
And Mitchell, be very sure about your decision here. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and terror wash over her. She had committed to helping Queen Camilla, but she had also set in motion a series of events that would inevitably lead to consequences she couldn't foresee.
Thank you, Queen Camilla said quietly, tears flowing freely now. Whatever happens because of this, I want you to know that you're giving a dying man the chance to say goodbye to his wife.
That matters more than any job or any protocol.
As they walked together toward the medical wing, Sarah wondered if she was making the greatest mistake of her career or fulfilling her duty in the truest sense. Either way, she had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, choosing human compassion over institutional compliance in a decision that would echo far beyond this single night.
The medical wing doors loomed ahead, and beyond them lay not just a dying king but the future of Sarah Mitchell's life and career. She had made her choice, but the consequences were just beginning to unfold.
As Sarah and Queen Camilla approached the medical wing entrance, the atmosphere in the palace seemed to shift around them. Word of their movement had clearly spread through the security network, and Sarah could sense the heightened tension in routine radio chatter. Her colleagues were watching, waiting to see how this unprecedented situation would resolve itself. The medical wing doors stood like sentinels, heavy oak panels that had witnessed decades of royal health crises.
Behind these doors lay not just King Charles, but the culmination of Sarah's career-defining decision. She felt the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders as she realized that whatever happened next would be recorded, analyzed, and remembered long after she was gone.
Dr. Hamilton appeared in the doorway before they could knock, his face flushed with anger and his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled.
He had clearly been alerted to their approach and positioned himself to block their entry. His eyes moved between Sarah and Queen Camilla with undisguised frustration.
"This is absolutely unacceptable," Dr. Hamilton said, his voice low but intense.
"I gave explicit instructions that no one was to be admitted. The king's condition is extremely fragile, and any disruption could have catastrophic consequences."
Sarah stepped forward, her training kicking in as she navigated the delicate balance between supporting Queen Camilla and respecting Dr. Hamilton's medical authority.
"Doctor, I understand your concerns. However, we have documented evidence that the patient specifically requested family presence, and Code 7 protocols require accommodation of such requests when medically feasible." Dr. Hamilton's expression hardened.
Code 7 protocols are subject to medical override when patient safety is at risk. As the attending physician, I am exercising that override.
"The king is sedated and not in a condition to receive visitors." Queen Camilla spoke for the first time since their arrival, her voice carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being heard.
"Dr. Hamilton, 20 minutes ago, Nurse Patricia informed me that Charles was awake and asking for me by name."
Has his condition changed so dramatically in such a short time? The doctor's pause was almost imperceptible, but Sarah caught it. She also noticed the way his eyes shifted slightly, a tell that suggested he was choosing his words carefully, rather than stating simple medical facts.
"The king's condition fluctuates rapidly," Dr. Hamilton said finally. "What may have been true 20 minutes ago is not necessarily true now." It was then that Nurse Patricia appeared behind Dr. Hamilton, her face showing clear distress. She had obviously overheard the conversation, and her expression suggested internal conflict between loyalty to her medical superior and concern for her patient's wishes. "Doctor," Nurse Patricia said quietly, "His Majesty is awake again." "He's been asking for Her Majesty quite persistently." Dr. Hamilton turned on the nurse with barely contained fury. "I thought I made it clear that patient status was not to be discussed with unauthorized personnel." Sarah saw an opportunity in the exchange. "Doctor, if the patient is conscious and specifically requesting family presence, don't Code 7 protocols actually require family access unless there are immediate life-threatening medical procedures in progress?" She was pushing her knowledge of emergency protocols to their limit, but years of training had taught her that bureaucratic systems often contained their own solutions if you knew where to look. Hamilton's resistance was beginning to seem less like medical necessity and more like personal preference. Queen Camilla moved closer to the doorway, and Sarah noticed that she could see past Dr. Hamilton into the medical suite beyond. The Queen's face suddenly crumpled with grief, and she raised her hand to her mouth. "Oh, Charles," Queen Camilla whispered, tears streaming down her face. Sarah followed the Queen's gaze and caught a glimpse of the king through the partially open door. He appeared to be propped up in a hospital bed surrounded by monitoring equipment. Even from a distance, his condition looked grave, but what struck Sarah most was that his eyes were open, and he seemed to be looking toward the door. Dr. Hamilton quickly stepped to block their view, but the moment had revealed the fundamental dishonesty in his position. The king was clearly conscious, clearly aware of his surroundings, and apparently seeking contact with his wife. "Doctor," Sarah said, her voice taking on a harder edge. "I need to understand your medical justification for preventing a conscious patient from seeing his spouse when he has specifically requested her presence." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Dr. Hamilton looked between Sarah and Queen Camilla, clearly calculating his options.
His authority was being questioned by a security guard and a grieving wife, but his position required medical rather than administrative justification. Nurse Patricia stepped forward again, her voice barely audible.
"Doctor, perhaps if Her Majesty's visit were brief and supervised, that's enough," Dr. Hamilton snapped. "I am the senior physician here and my orders will be followed. This discussion is over." But Queen Camilla had heard enough.
With a sudden movement that surprised everyone, she stepped around Dr. Hamilton and into the medical suite. "Charles? Darling, I'm here." From inside the room came a voice that, while weak, was unmistakably that of the king.
"Camilla? Thank God. I've been asking for you for hours." The simple exchange revealed the falseness of Dr. Hamilton's entire position. The king was not only conscious but coherent enough to express relief at his wife's arrival. Whatever medical concerns the doctor might have, they clearly didn't justify preventing this reunion. Dr. Hamilton moved as if to physically remove Queen Camilla from the room, but Sarah stepped forward to intercede. "Doctor, the patient has confirmed his request for family presence. Any attempt to remove his wife against his wishes would constitute a violation of patient rights." It was a bold statement, pushing beyond Sarah's security authority into areas of medical ethics and patient advocacy. But she had committed to this course of action, and she couldn't abandon Queen Camilla now. From inside the medical suite, they could hear quiet conversation between the royal couple.
King Charles's voice was weak but animated, as if Queen Camilla's presence had given him energy he hadn't possessed moments before. The medical monitors showed no signs of distress, contradicting Dr. Hamilton's warnings about catastrophic consequences.
"This is irregulable, Doctor," Hamilton muttered, but his tone suggested defeat rather than continued resistance. The situation had moved beyond his ability to control, and the evidence of his obstructionism was now obvious to everyone present. Sarah keyed her radio to update the Security Command Center. "Central, this is Mitchell. Family access has been successfully implemented under Code 7 protocols. Patient is conscious and responsive. Situation stable. Over." The response came back quickly. "Mitchell, be advised that Chief of Security Hartwell is en route to your location. Maintain current status until his arrival. Over. Jeffrey Hartwell." Sarah felt her stomach drop at the mention of her former mentor's name.
If anyone could understand her reasoning, it would be Hartwell, but his arrival also meant that the situation had escalated beyond the medical wing into the highest levels of palace security. Her decision would now face scrutiny from the very person who had taught her the importance of following orders without question.
Inside the medical suite, Queen Camilla's voice carried clearly through the doorway. "I love you, Charles. I'm not going anywhere." The king's response was too quiet to hear, but the emotion in Queen Camilla's subsequent sobbing suggested he had said something profoundly meaningful. Sarah realized she was witnessing not just a medical visit, but potentially a final goodbye between two people who had found love later in life and were now facing its end. Doctor. Hamilton seemed to deflate as the reality of the situation became clear. His medical authority had been overruled not by administrative decree but by the fundamental human need for connection in the face of mortality. Whatever protocols he thought he was protecting, they had proven less important than the basic dignity of allowing a dying man to speak with his wife. Nurse Patricia approached Sarah quietly.
"Thank you," she whispered. "I've been a nurse for 30 years, and I've never seen anyone prevent a spouse from visiting a dying patient."
It was wrong, and you made it right. The validation from a medical professional meant more to Sarah than she had expected. She had acted on instinct and compassion, but having her decision confirmed by someone with medical expertise provided crucial support for whatever consequences might follow. Heavy footsteps echoed down the hallway, announcing Jeffrey Hartwell's arrival. Sarah straightened her posture and prepared to explain her actions to the man who had shaped her understanding of duty and loyalty. She had violated his teachings about following orders, but she hoped he would understand that some orders deserved to be challenged when human decency hung in the balance. As Hartwell appeared around the corner, his expression grave but unreadable,
Sarah realized that her career had reached its defining moment. Behind the medical suite doors, a king and queen shared what might be their final conversation.
In the hallway, a security guard prepared to defend the most important decision of her professional life. The collision between protocol and compassion had reached its climax, and Sarah Mitchell stood at the center of a storm that would reshape her understanding of what it truly meant to serve.
Geoffrey Hartwell approached with the measured pace of a man accustomed to crisis management. At 62, he carried himself with the bearing of someone who had navigated decades of palace intrigue while maintaining absolute loyalty to the crown.
His silver hair was perfectly groomed despite the late hour, and his uniform remained immaculate, testament to standards that never relaxed regardless of circumstances. Sarah watched her former mentor's face for any hint of his thinking, but Hartwell had perfected the art of revealing nothing until he chose to speak.
Behind him walked Assistant Chief Stevens, a younger man whose nervous energy contrasted sharply with Hartwell's calm authority. The presence of multiple senior security officials confirmed that Sarah's actions had created ripples far beyond the medical wing.
"Mitchell," Hartwell said, his voice carrying the neutral tone that had intimidated countless subordinates over the years. "Report." Sarah straightened, drawing on every lesson Hartwell had taught her about clear, factual communication under pressure.
"Sir, at approximately 21:30 hours, Queen Camilla approached, requesting emergency family access to the medical wing. I verified her request against documented patient wishes, confirmed Code 7 protocol applicability, and escorted Her Majesty to the medical suite."
The patient was conscious and specifically requested his wife's presence. Hartwell's eyes moved past Sarah to Dr. Hamilton, who had been standing silently since Queen Camilla entered the medical suite. "Doctor, what's your assessment of the situation?" Dr. Hamilton's response revealed the frustration he had been containing. "Chief Hartwell, I specifically ordered no visitors to maintain optimal medical conditions. The king's condition is critical, and any emotional stress could prove fatal. This guard ignored my explicit instructions and violated established medical protocols." "And yet," Hartwell said, glancing toward the medical suite where quiet conversation continued between the royal couple, "the patient appears stable and responsive. Are you suggesting that seeing his wife has harmed the king's condition?" The question was delivered with characteristic precision, cutting through Dr. Yang's state, Hamilton's arguments to expose their central weakness. If Queen Camilla's presence was truly medically dangerous, the king's vital signs should reflect that stress. Instead, the monitor showed a patient who seemed calmer than he had been all evening. Dr.
Hamilton's pause revealed his difficulty in justifying his position. The risk remains significant regardless of current stability.
Medical protocols exist to prevent complications, not just respond to them. Assistant Chief Stevens stepped forward, his nervousness evident in his clipped speech. "Sir, we have reports that media outlets are beginning to gather outside the gates. Word of the king's condition is spreading, and we need to ensure that all security decisions can withstand public scrutiny."
Sarah felt a chill at the mention of media attention. Her personal choice was about to become part of the public record, analyzed and debated by people who had never faced the impossible balance between duty and compassion.
Whatever happened next would follow her for the rest of her life. From inside the medical suite, King Charles's voice rose slightly, audible to everyone in the hallway.
"Camilla, promise me you'll remember the good times. Don't let the sadness overshadow all the joy we've shared." The words silenced the debate in the hallway.
Everyone present suddenly understood that they were witnessing not just a medical crisis, but potentially the final conversation between a couple who had weathered decades of public scrutiny to find genuine partnership in their later years. Nurse Patricia, who had remained quiet during the security discussion, finally spoke up.
"Gentlemen, I've been monitoring His Majesty's vitals for the past 6 hours. His blood pressure, heart rate, and oxygen levels have all improved since Her Majesty arrived."
Sometimes medical wisdom means recognizing that emotional needs are part of physical healing. Her words carried weight that went beyond medical expertise.
As the person closest to the patient's actual condition, her observations undermined Dr. Hamilton's insistence that Queen Camilla's presence posed medical risks.
Hartwell studied Sarah with the intense focus she remembered from her early training days. "Mitchell, help me understand your decision-making process."
You received direct orders from a senior medical official to deny access. Walk me through how you justified overriding those orders. Sarah had prepared for this moment during the long wait for Hartwell's arrival. "Sir, I weighed Dr. Shipp.
Hamilton's medical concerns against documented evidence of the patient's explicit request for family presence. Code 7 protocols exist specifically for situations where patient wishes conflict with institutional preferences. I determined that upholding the patient's right to family contact during a life-threatening crisis took precedence over administrative convenience. Administrative convenience? Dr. Code denied. Hamilton interjected, his voice sharp with indignation. I'm trying to save the king's life, not satisfy some bureaucratic procedure. Hartwell raised a hand to quiet the doctor, his attention remaining focused on Sarah. You use the phrase patient's right to family contact. That's medical ethics terminology, not security protocol language.
Where did that reasoning come from? The question cut to the heart of Sarah's decision, forcing her to articulate the moral framework that had guided her choice.
Sir, I lost my husband 5 years ago.
During his final days, I learned that dying isn't just a medical process. It's a human experience that requires dignity and connection. When I saw Queen Camilla's pain and heard that the king was asking for her, I realized that protecting the royal family sometimes means protecting their humanity, not just their physical safety.
Hartwell's expression remained unreadable, but Sarah thought she detected a flicker of something, perhaps understanding, in his eyes. Behind him, Assistant Chief Stevens looked increasingly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation.
Sir, Stevens said, we need to consider the precedent this sets. If security guards begin making independent decisions about which orders to follow, the entire chain of command becomes meaningless.
It was a valid concern, and Sarah knew it.
Her decision could be interpreted as encouraging insubordination throughout the security organization. But she also believed that blind obedience without moral consideration made the entire system vulnerable to abuse.
Queen Camilla's voice carried from the medical suite, and everyone in the hallway could hear her singing softly. Sarah recognized the melody as an old hymn, something that spoke of comfort and eternal love. The king's voice joined in weakly, creating a duet that seemed to transform the sterile medical environment into something sacred. The singing stopped abruptly, replaced by the sound of medical monitors changing their rhythm. Dr. Hamilton immediately moved toward the medical suite, his professional instincts overriding his political concerns.
What's happening? Hartwell asked, following the doctor into the room. Sarah remained at her post but could see through the doorway as medical staff gathered around the king's bed.
Queen Camilla held her husband's hand while Dr. Hamilton checked various monitors and equipment. The scene unfolded with quiet urgency rather than panic, suggesting a change in condition rather than an emergency. After several minutes, Dr. Hamilton emerged from the medical suite, his expression complex. The king's vital signs have stabilized at levels we haven't seen all evening. His breathing is easier, his heart rate more regular. Medically speaking, his wife's presence appears to have provided significant comfort. The admission carried weight beyond its immediate medical implications. Dr. Hamilton was essentially acknowledging that his opposition to Queen Camilla's visit had been wrong, that his focus on protocol had overlooked the healing power of emotional support. Hartwell looked at Dr. Hamilton with the same intensity he had directed at Sarah. Doctor, given this development, do you still maintain that the Queen's presence poses a medical risk? Dr. Hamilton's response came after a long pause. No, if anything, her presence seems to be helping him fight. I may have been too focused on controlling variables rather than considering the patient's overall well-being.
Sarah felt a surge of vindication but also recognition that the consequences of her actions remained uncertain. She had been proven right about the immediate situation, but institutional systems didn't always reward being right when it came at the cost of following orders. Assistant Chief Stevens stepped closer to Hartwell and spoke in a low voice, but not so quietly that Sarah couldn't hear. Sir, regardless of the outcome, we have a guard who ignored direct medical orders. The precedent issue remains. Hartwell nodded slowly, and Sarah braced herself for whatever judgment was coming. Her career hung in the balance, dependent on whether her former mentor would prioritize institutional authority or acknowledge that some situations required independent moral judgment. From the medical suite came the sound of quiet laughter, the king and queen sharing a moment of joy despite the gravity of his condition. The sound seemed to highlight the absurdity of debating protocol while two people experienced what might be their final hours together. Hartwell looked at Sarah with an expression she couldn't read. Mitchell, you've created a situation that requires careful handling. Your actions tonight will be reviewed at the highest levels and there will be consequences. But before we discuss those consequences, I need you to answer one question honestly. Given the same circumstances, would you make the same choice again? Sarah met her mentor's gaze directly, knowing that her answer would determine not just her future but also how she would live with herself regardless of what that future held. The question demanded complete honesty about her values and her understanding of what duty truly meant. The weight of 23 years of service, the trust of a dying king and his wife, and the judgment of history all pressed down on her as she prepared to give the answer
that would define her legacy. Sarah looked directly into Geoffrey Hartwell's eyes, the man who had shaped her understanding of service and duty for over 2 decades.
The question hung between them with the weight of absolute truth, demanding an answer that would reveal not just her judgment of this specific situation, but her fundamental beliefs about what it meant to serve the crown.
Yes, sir, Sarah said without hesitation.
Given the same circumstances, knowing what I know now, I would make exactly the same choice. Protecting the royal family means protecting their dignity and humanity, not just following orders that serve institutional convenience rather than human need.
Hartwell's expression remained neutral, but Sarah caught a slight nod, almost imperceptible, that suggested her answer hadn't surprised him. Behind him, Assistant Chief Stevens looked increasingly uncomfortable, clearly preferring a response that acknowledged wrongdoing rather than defended independent judgment.
From the medical suite, they could hear King Charles speaking in stronger tones than he had managed all evening. "My darling, I need you to know that these years with you have been the happiest of my life.
Whatever happens, I want you to remember that we found each other when we thought love was behind us." Queen Camilla's response was muffled by tears, but her presence clearly continued to provide comfort that no medical protocol could replicate.
The monitors showed sustained improvement in the king's vital signs, objective proof that emotional support had succeeded where purely medical intervention had limitations.
Dr. Hamilton approached Hartwell with visible reluctance. "Chief, I owe you and Ms. Mitchell an apology.
My insistence on isolation protocols was medically conservative but perhaps unnecessarily rigid. The king's improvement since his wife's arrival suggests that psychological comfort is an important component of his treatment."
The doctor's admission carried more significance than a simple acknowledgement of error. It represented a recognition that institutional authority, whether medical or administrative, could sometimes be wrong when it ignored fundamental human needs. Hartwell's radio crackled with an urgent message from the palace's senior staff. "Chief Hartwell, this is Deputy Private Secretary Morrison.
We need immediate consultation regarding media statements about the king's condition. The Prime Minister's office is requesting updates, and we have international media beginning to arrive at the gates."
Sarah realized that her decision had implications far beyond her personal career. The story of a security guard defying orders to allow Queen Camilla access to her dying husband would become part of the historical record, analyzed and debated for years to come.
The personal had become political. The individual choice had become institutional precedent. "Sir," Assistant Chief Stevens said quietly, "we need to consider how this situation will be characterized in official reports."
Miss Mitchell's actions, while well-intentioned, represent a clear breach of command structure. Hartwell looked between Stevens and Sarah, weighing institutional concerns against human realities. The sound of continuing conversation from the medical suite provided ongoing evidence that Sarah's choice had served the royal family's actual needs rather than their theoretical protection. "Stevens," Hartwell said finally, "prepare a preliminary report stating that emergency family access protocols were successfully implemented during a medical crisis. Note that security personnel exercised appropriate judgment in balancing medical restrictions against documented patient requests." Sarah felt a surge of hope at Hartwell's framing, but she also understood that the situation remained far from resolved. Official reports could be written in ways that minimized controversy, but the underlying questions about authority, judgment, and institutional flexibility would require broader discussion.
Stare Dravik Section 51-1. Nurse Patricia emerged from the medical suite with tears in her eyes.
"I'm sorry to interrupt, but I thought you should know. His Majesty asked me to thank everyone who made it possible for him to see his wife tonight. He said that sometimes the greatest service comes from people who have the courage to do what's right instead of what's easy." The king's message, delivered through his nurse, carried the weight of royal approval for Sarah's decision. Whatever administrative consequences might follow, she had received validation from the person whose welfare had motivated her choice. Queen Camilla appeared in the doorway, her face showing the emotional exhaustion of the night, but also a peace that hadn't been present hours earlier.
"Gentlemen," she said, addressing the security team, "I want you to know that what happened tonight represents the very best of public service. Sometimes protecting people means protecting their right to love and be loved, especially in their most vulnerable moments."
Hartwell stepped forward and bowed slightly. "Your Majesty, I apologize for any confusion or delay in providing access to His Majesty.
We are reviewing our procedures to ensure that such situations are handled more smoothly in the future." "There was no confusion, Chief Hartwell," Queen Camilla replied. "Miss Mitchell understood exactly what was needed and had the courage to act on that understanding. She protected my husband's dignity and my right to be with him when he needed me most. I will not forget her service." The Queen's public endorsement of Sarah's actions created a new dynamic in the situation. Whatever disciplinary procedures might typically follow,
they would now occur under the scrutiny of someone who clearly supported the decision to prioritize human need over administrative preference. Sarah's radio crackled with a message from the Central Security Desk.
All units be advised that His Majesty's condition has stabilized. Medical team reports significant improvement in vital signs. Family access protocols remain in effect until further notice. The announcement confirmed what everyone in the hallway already knew. Sarah's decision had been vindicated by results. The king's condition had improved rather than deteriorated, contradicting predictions that emotional stress would prove harmful. Dr. Hamilton approached Sarah directly, his earlier hostility replaced by professional respect.
Ms. Mitchell, I want you to know that your advocacy for patient rights tonight reminded me why I became a physician in the first place. Sometimes medical professionals can become so focused on controlling variables that we forget the healing power of human connection.
The doctor's acknowledgement meant more to Sarah than she had expected. Her decision had been made on instinct and compassion rather than medical knowledge, but having it validated by the attending physician provided crucial support for her reasoning.
Hartwell gathered the security team around him, his expression suggesting transition from crisis management to longer-term planning. The immediate situation is stable, but we need to prepare for extensive scrutiny of tonight's events. The media will want to understand how security decisions were made, and there will be questions about protocols and procedures.
Sarah understood that her actions would become part of a larger conversation about institutional flexibility, individual judgment, and the balance between following orders and serving genuine needs. The story would be told and retold, interpreted through different lenses depending on the teller's perspective.
Mitchell, Hartwell said, "You'll need to prepare a detailed incident report explaining your decision-making process. Be thorough, be honest, and be prepared for extensive questioning. What you did tonight will be studied and debated at the highest levels of government." As the immediate crisis began to wind down, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had joined palace security believing that duty meant following orders without question, that loyalty required suppressing personal judgment in favor of institutional authority. Tonight had taught her that true service sometimes demanded the courage to act on deeper principles, even when such action carried enormous personal risk. 3 months later, Sarah Mitchell stood in the same hallway where she had made her career-defining decision. The medical wing had returned to normal operations, though King Charles had recovered sufficiently to resume limited royal duties. The crisis that had seemed so overwhelming that October night had resolved into a story of successful navigation between protocol and compassion. Her incident report had indeed been studied at the highest levels, resulting in revised emergency protocols that formally recognized the importance of family access during medical crises.
The changes bore her name in internal documentation, ensuring that future guards would have clearer guidance when facing similar situations. The media coverage had been extensive but generally supportive, framing her actions as an example of thoughtful public service rather than dangerous insubordination. Queen Camilla had spoken publicly about the importance of security personnel who understood that protecting people meant protecting their humanity, as well as their safety. Geoffrey Hartwell had recommended Sarah for promotion, citing her demonstration of moral courage and independent judgment under pressure. The recommendation had been approved, making her the first security guard in palace history to advance to supervisory rank, based partially on a decision to override direct orders. As Sarah walked through the palace corridors on her evening rounds, she carried with her the knowledge that duty and compassion need not be opposing forces. Sometimes the greatest service came from having the courage to recognize when rules had outlived their purpose, when blind obedience served no one's interests. The king and queen had returned to their normal routine, but Sarah occasionally saw them in the hallways and caught the slight nods of recognition that acknowledged the bond formed during that difficult night. She had risked everything to protect their right to face crisis together, and they had not forgotten her sacrifice. Emma called from university that evening, as she did every week since the events that had made her mother briefly famous.
"Mom, I saw the article about the new protocols. They're calling them the Mitchell Amendments.
How does it feel to have palace policy named after you?" Sarah smiled as she looked out at the palace gardens, where spring flowers were beginning to bloom despite the lingering cold. "It feels like 23 years of service finally made sense, love."
Sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust your heart when your head tells you to follow orders that don't serve anyone's actual needs. That is.
As night fell over Buckingham Palace, Sarah Mitchell continued her rounds with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had discovered that true duty sometimes required the courage to disobey, that genuine loyalty meant protecting people's humanity as well as their safety. Her choice had changed not only her own life,
but also the institution she had served, proving that individual conscience could reshape systems when applied with courage and wisdom.
The palace stood as it always had, a symbol of continuity and tradition. But within its walls, new protocols recognized that sometimes the greatest protection came from understanding when rules should bend to serve the deeper purposes they were meant to preserve.
No admission. Guard risks everything to keep Camilla out of the palace medical suite.